Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome at our webinar, How a SOC Can Protect Your Business 24/7. We will start off, since it's already 3:01. I'm Koen Jacobs from SecWise, managing partner. I'm in the back, supported by Michel and Glenn, who will keep an eye. Also on the Q&A, which is available if you want to ask a question. And then we will come back to that question after the slide deck itself has ended, let's say. That. Okay, let's start. Maybe a small agenda. First, I will give you a small introduction, some figures, some statistics on cybersecurity, maybe kicking in a little bit the open door, but just to give you some heads up. Then we will discuss, of course, the core, what are the roles of a modern security operations center. And as mentioned, in the last step, we will answer all the questions which you can ask in the Q&A feature of this webinar, which will be monitored by Michel and Glenn in the back. But we will do that for practicality on the end of the webinar. This is also recorded, this webinar, so it will also become available online afterwards. If you would like to recap or review the webinar, it will become available online. So that's also an option afterwards for everybody. Okay, let's dive in. So first, as mentioned, some statistics maybe on global cybercrime insights. Not new, but cybercrime is growing year over year. It has since 2015 even an exponential growth. We're now already surpassing the $10 trillion in revenue. Cybercrime is damaging every year, which is huge. Basically, it would be an economy. It would be a great thing to be active in, but unfortunately it's a crime economy, so not something we would like to be in, whether we are or indirectly as a defense operator, of course. On the same thing, cybercrime is growing. You can talk really about cyber hacking.inc, let's say. It's an organized crime business. We have a huge lack of cybersecurity professionals, not only in Europe, by the way, but all over the world. We need more people who are even from student kind of interest or already in the cybersecurity space, who would like to be in the cybersecurity space, but even there, the gap is only growing overall in Europe and on a worldwide scale as well. The good thing is, the third point, if you see that from all breaches, 70% or nearly 70% in that latest report is somewhere down the road detected by a security solution. But the downside is, and that's the last point, that in 82% of those high-profile breaches, the alarm is triggered somewhere by a security solution, but it's not investigated thoroughly enough, meaning that the alarm went off, but no actions were taken to mitigate the potential incident or the potential threat which was emerging, let's say, in the first phase. And that's also a little bit combined with the state of attacks that we see. The sophistication of the attacks is increasing. It's not immediately that they have the full foot in the organization. Of course, they often start off in a kind of low radar kind of tactic. But that's the crucial point from a security operations side, that you need to take action as soon as possible, making sure they don't get full control afterwards, after X steps they have to take as an attacker. And somewhere, often an alarm goes off, but the problem is we need to react sooner on those type of threats. And therefore, you need SecOps, of course, of people who are investigating those SecOps data. On the other side, if you look at cybersecurity and people or organizations who have a SOC capability or SecOps capability, of course, if you have SOC capabilities, you will be faster in your threat detection and response. And that's the core of a SOC, of course. It will also, of course, have a budget or total cost of ownership impact, where you see if you want to build up your own SOC competence internally, it will be an investment, of course. If you compare to a SOC as a service, it will be a bigger investment often, because you need to start from zero, where then in the SOC as a service, of course, you have the scale that SOC is operating for multiple customers. And if you would have the bad luck of really having a data breach, also the cost, the calculated cost for your breach will be less when a SOC is already somewhere in the operations than one without the SOC in this data overview. That's mainly due to the reason that you will detect earlier in the stage of your data breach that something is going on when you have a SOC operations versus you don't have SOC operations. But yeah, that's like mentioned, kicking in the open door. Of course, if you want to start with SecOps, it's not just a click in the box or putting somewhere a new configuration up and running after 1 hour. There are some struggles. There are also some potential highlights that we need to mention, of course. You can't just start off straight away. It depends a bit on where are you today in your security setup itself. Because security operations, we need tooling. We need security sources. We need protecting tooling that will be the source of your security operations. Those might be already abundant, but they might be misconfigured. They might be lacking certain features maybe. Or on the other side, if they're misconfigured, they might throw up a high volume of alerts towards security people or people who are following those operations, which gives you a little bit the false positives, but also the lack of follow-up afterwards, because they say, yeah, it's too high volume. We don't have time to do all those analysis on top of all those type of alerts. You need to maintain those tools, of course. Automation is key nowadays in operations. You can't do everything manually anymore. That will just be too much time consuming. It will cost money, of course. Everything will cost money. So what about the available budgets? The threats are only increasing, as we know. Also, sophistication is increasing. So we need people who are skilled to handle those kind of things. And last but not least, also regulation and compliance pressure is continuously increasing. I think about these two now to be very relevant in the sector. Yeah, that will only increase over time as well. So we need to take all of that into account when we start with security operations, of course. But that being said, maybe a last statistic. If we look at our own security operations center, so we have our own 24/7 SOC service, it's called Watch. What were the last months the typical top 4 of attacks that we encountered in our incidents and alerts, which were being reported over our various customers that we have nowadays? Still number 1, which is not surprising, I think, is phishing, in all its forms, by the way. Phishing can be done in multiple forms. You still see the old kind of old school campaigns from phishing, which don't do a lot of damage anymore, of course, because if you have an advanced antivirus of EDR solution or a spam filter, it will always be blocking those old campaigns. But we see a huge increase in sophistication in social engineering in these type of phishing campaigns. So the hackers, and especially the organized crime hackers, they are becoming more and more intelligent and sophisticated, of course, in driving campaigns which are or can be really successful, because they will lure people in doing actions themselves. It's not a typical campaign anymore where we will send an email and in attachment you have kind of an antivirus or a virus or whatever kind of executable. Most often that will be blocked by your antivirus or even EDR solution already. It's more the type of campaigns where they will try to lure people to an URL or to do a specific action, making sure that the user itself or him or herself will do that action, avoiding detection by the more classical antivirus or EDR solutions. Number 2, the malware, ransomware kind of scenarios, of course, but especially in this case, malware, they now try to bundle in unofficial or illegally to be downloaded software, or even SaaS apps they mimic. They think, or the people who are trying to download or use that SaaS app think they have the official app or application or software, but it's basically one controlled by a malicious threat actor, which they then will use to download, of course, malware on top of the advice or the endpoint. Number 3, that's a very specific campaign that we see now. That's why we added it into this slide deck, is fake CAPTCHA attacks. We will come back to that later in an example, but that's like a campaign which is running now. We saw that already popping up at a couple of our customers. That's what you typically see, by the way. If once a campaign pops up, you see it popping up all over the scale of our SOC clients, because it's run often by various threat actors. And this is a very specific one. This is also very hard to detect, by the way. So that's why we mentioned it here in the list, and we will come back to it later in this presentation. And of course, number 4 is always has and will be on the list, I think, are vulnerability and exposure exploits. It's very easy for hackers, if you have vulnerabilities in systems, in operating systems, but also other application-like systems, to do specific attacks based on those vulnerabilities. On the dark web, there's a whole kind of e-commerce environment, by the way, where people, even not skilled hackers, can buy the toolkit on how to exploit vulnerabilities, even with the toolkit itself. It's a business model which is behind it, in which the inventor of that toolkit will ask a certain percentage of the gain, and that specific attack will have. So that's why vulnerability and exposure management is also a huge attention point in security operations, of course. Meaning, from a defense point of view, it's of course not about being secure just once or having a secure setup and then thinking, okay, let's leave it be and we will be secure for every point in time. No, it's about staying secure all the time, and all the time means also 24/7. Although your operations in your organization or company might not be 24/7, that doesn't mean that hackers won't try to attack you after our normal office hours, let's say. Even we see on a Friday afternoon, late afternoon, the increase of alerts in our SOC reporting based on, for example, phishing identity attacks, because they would like, from a hacking point of view, they would like to have that first foot between the door just before the weekend starts, because they know, of course, that most IT organizations and operation teams aren't really active in the weekend. So it will give them more time to get a bigger stronghold in your organization if they get that foot between the door, let's say on a Friday late afternoon. So that's why 24/7 follow-up is crucial, of course, just to give one. But if you have 24/7 operations, it's very crucial, of course, that you have also, from security operations point of view, a 24/7 coverage. Transporting that to what does that then mean for a modern security operations center? How should it operate? What are the topics we are talking about? Well, basically, there are multiple topics. If we take the NIST framework again, SOC basically started off with the detect response capability. We have tooling which will throw a lot of alerts. We want to detect that, of course, and we want to respond and do the analysis, etc. That's the core of a SOC or a security operations center. However, that should not limit on which are the topics a SOC should operate. As mentioned, you have, most importantly, also a prevent part. You will learn a lot of insights from your security operations. Use them to do preventive and proactive measures. And also from the other's perspective, if you would have the bad luck to really have a major incident, your SOC and your operations should also have CSIRT capabilities to help you recover even post-incident, let's say, and getting back to normal operations. If we take a little bit closer in those specific items, it all starts off, of course, in the orange category. So we have our detect capabilities. We have the security monitoring in place. Alerts will be analyzed, triaged, etc. If after analysis, that means we do have to do response actions. Those can be automated, by the way, or could be manual response actions. You will have those capabilities as well. But the story can't end there. As mentioned, you have the lessons learned, what happened, how could we maybe prevent the specific incident, how can we loop back that advice towards the customer. Also maybe have to do changes in your configuration, adding maybe some specific security tooling, but also for our SOC service itself. If you see, for example, now the specific campaigns popping up, CAPTCHA attacks, whatever, we might be able to write specific detection use cases or even automation playbooks to augment our detection, but also our response capabilities, just already from a SOC perspective. So that has to be a 360 loop. It will always be in evolution. That's why the governance part is also very important, not only in SecOps, by the way, but overall in cybersecurity. As of 25, by the way, the NIST framework was updated in all those specific topics. Govern is a new topic which was added also in the NIST framework. Your cybersecurity setup, it needs to be alive, it needs to evolve over time. So does your SecOps process itself and your whole SecOps operations, by the way. Let's take maybe a closer look to all those different topics a SOC and roles a SOC can play. So first focusing on the protect, detect, response part. This is the core, as we mentioned, the core of your SOC operations, of course. That's why you have security operations in the first place. If we look at our specific SOC architecture, so our 24/7 watch SOC architecture, it's very specifically in its design. You will see the light gray area, which is the customer environment. It's your own environment, it's your own tenant. If we talk about Microsoft tenants, for example, we will always enable a security SIEM solution in your own tenant. In our case, that's Microsoft Central, which is the SIEM solution from Microsoft. It will be activated, configured in your own tenant. To that SIEM system, we will connect all the different security sources you might have, or which are interesting, let's say, to have as a connection. Because those components today, those will be your protective measures that you have in place. It can also be augmented with, for example, raw security logs. And there might be interesting log data which is available, which can be made available for investigation reasons, for forensic reasons, detection reasons even, which might be uploaded or connected to that Microsoft Central SIEM environment. In this case, by this setup, this means that all your data, all your security interested data, remains in your own environment and is still under your own control, of course. The only thing that we do is through an Azure Lighthouse, which is a standard connector of Microsoft. We link your SIEM environment with our environment, which is the light blue area, where we also have, for example, our Microsoft SIEM solution as the overall cockpit for all our clients, of course, but also a ServiceNow ITSM tool and specific workplaces where we have detection rules, which are analytical rules to have specific detection use cases. We have response automations, playbooks, which are the SOAR capabilities, so the orchestration of automated response, and different threat intel sources, which are also available. We push them through basically and make them active on the Sentinel SIEM environment of the customer, because here all the magic happens, all the different data sources are connected in your environment, so it's crucial that those things become available on the Sentinel of the customer itself. Once we have that connection made, the only thing we link through to our space here are the alerts and the incidents info, to have that cockpit for all the customers. Our analysts monitor those alerts. Once they see an alert popping up, they will use the same connection to log on to the Sentinel of the customer to do the analysis, potential response actions, etc. So that happens through the same connection, because here is all the data necessary to do that specific analysis, of course. Once you have a positive incident, it will become automatically a security ticket in the ServiceNow portal. That will drive all the official communication we will have between us and the customer, making sure that it's all documented, which actions need to be taken by whom, etc., etc. That's all locked in the ServiceNow environment. And the security ticket will only be closed once the incident is remediated, of course, which is obvious. Also linked to that, we have our specific customer portal that will give you real-time insights, dashboards on which are the alerts, which were the actions taken. All those specific reporting insights will become available in a real-time customer portal for every customer specific, of course. So that's a very specific SOC architecture, but today it's crucial. It's crucial that you stay, especially based on additional compliance rules, etc., that you stay the owner of your own data, that you don't have to transfer customer data to a SIEM somewhere hosted by a third-party provider, because that will mean that all your data will also be offloaded to another environment. In this specific setup, that is not necessary, and the customer remains in control of his own data, and also has, by the way, access and a view on his own SIEM environment, because that will be running in your own environment. Based on this, we often get the question by customers, okay, great, but we have a very diverse IT landscape. We have multiple potential security sources. What do we need to ingest here in this SIEM solution? We want security follow-up. Okay, great, but what are the potential sources? Of course, if you look at the modern IT landscape, that indeed can be a complex situation. You have your office environment. You have people working from home after COVID, which is basically today a given. You have potential SaaS applications which are being used. You have your cloud environments in IaaS, PaaS, whatever kind of contexts, often a combination of both, by the way. And you might even have an on-prem environment in a data center or your own server rooms, etc. So it's often a complex situation with multiple potential attack vectors and potential threats which can arise, of course, based on which are the targets of that specific attack. So to answer that question, what do we need to log in our SIEM? So basically have available for security operations. You need to make that analysis, and the analysis is often made, not often, in our case, is made on 6 criteria, of which the 2 first one, which is threat detection value and investigation or hunting value, are the most important criteria, because that will determine if we have potential source, whether it's a really security component or it might be potential log data. What's the added value from a security operations perspective? Is there any added value anyway? Whether it's for threat detection, whether it's for investigation or hunting value afterwards. If the answer by default on that first question is already no, then that might not be a case for having this specific log or data source to be ingested in SIEM, because it will have no added value. Leave it out of your SIEM and your SecOps, because it might even create additional noise, might create additional costs, and it will never have any added value from a security perspective. So leave those type of potential sources, let's say, out of scope, because they won't derive any value from a SecOps perspective. If the answer is yes, you can look into the other criteria and say, okay, what's the volume of those log data, especially if we talk about log data? What are our specific retention times that we would like? How long would we like to keep that data available for analysis, for example? Are there any regulatory or compliance stipulations that we need to follow? That often depends in the sector in which you are active. That might be specific stipulations in how long you have to keep certain data available for security analysis. And of course, linked to volume and especially the retention also, how long do you keep the data available? You will have potential budget impact, which also might lead to the criteria if you say, okay, it will cost us, for example, a lot of money, but the value either for detection or investigation is rather low. That still can be then an excluding reason to say that let's keep that source for now out of our SecOps operations. SecOps also means, from our point of view, we would like to have a full view, of course, on everything which is interesting. So in this case, threat detection and investigation value of your environment, if possible. That doesn't mean that have to be from day one. We can have a gradual augmentation of the scope in your SOC, starting off maybe slow with some specific sources and then building up and adding additional sources over time to have that 360 view on the security landscape of your environment. That's always possible. Of course, it doesn't have to be from day one that you need the full scope. But from a security perspective, of course, the end goal should be to have the full scope of everything which is relevant and interesting, to have that in security operations. We will do this analysis, by the way, for each customer together. We will help you out with these determinations of what is interesting, what might not be interesting. That's something that is part of the onboarding into the security operations for every specific customer. There are, by the way, also from a cost perspective, best practices that we share with each customer. There are also new options, because remember, in the architecture, there will be a SIEM solution running in your own tenant. That means that the cost of whatever the SIEM will generate will be in your own invoicing, in your own contract, whether it's already a contract you have maybe with us for the licensing, or it's a direct contract with Microsoft or another vendor. It will come in your own bill, because Sentinel is an Azure component. It will run based on Azure consumption revenue, based on the data volume that you ingest and keep in Sentinel. So there are some new options available as of mid last year in Sentinel itself. The first one is the log tiering option. So Microsoft added 3 different tiers, levels, let's say, categories of log-based data that you can keep in Sentinel. Based on the tier you select, you will pay less. depending on the need, of course, and the functionality linked to that log type category. The highest category is an analytical tier. That means that it's really data that we would like to have immediately available for doing the analysis. And so that's, let's say, from a perspective, the hot data, that's really something we need. We do the analysis on top of. If you go down into the tier, the second category is basic log tiering, and you also have a third one, which is auxiliary, more archiving log tier, let's say. That's the type of data we would like to keep for historical reasons, but we don't need it immediately. It will only be necessary if we do specific historical forensics. Basic log tiering is also a little bit the same. We have that for forensic reasons, but it's not that really the hot data where we are continuously now doing the analysis on top of. So in this specific case, for example, it's based on Windows Security event log data. If we select analytical log tier, or we select for the same amount of data the basic log tier, you see the immediate decrease of cost based on that volume of data just by selecting the type of log data it will be in Sentinel directly. So that is already a first optimization you can do, and we will do together with the customer to see, okay, in which category does this type of data will fall, making sure you don't pay too much when it's not necessary, of course. Another option we have is also transformation rules, especially for raw log data. This is again a real-life example. Transformation rules is basically if you have, for example, event log data for, again, analysis reasons. In this specific case, it's for Defender for Endpoint, for example, and the syslog data is from Palo Alto firewalls. Especially Palo Alto firewalls, you might have a lot and huge amount of log data. But in this specific case, the customer would like to focus, of course, in all those amount of data on the really events that have the high value and where we have specific data, the detection capacity as well, because it's, as mentioned earlier, there's no use in collecting data if you don't have any added value driving out of that data. So by using the transformation rules of all that amount of data, you can really say and select which are the high value events linked data that we would like to select to log in and to ingest into Sentinel, because that's the type of data where all the analysis will be running on. And then you see, of course, linked to this case specifically, we had high value events that were selected, for example, botnet activity, anonymous proxy usage, malware alerts, command and control traffic, those kind of events. That's the thing that we need and we would like in Sentinel. But all the rest, which is of low value, we keep out of the Sentinel environment. You immediately see a decrease of volume, of course, from 25,000 gig here to 3.4, which of course also lowers the cost in your Sentinel theme environment as well. In this case, even by 500%, although the initial cost was not that high, but every saving you can make when it's not really deriving added value in the first place, it's one we can make by using transformation rules. There are other best practices, of course, available depending on the specific use cases, etc. But there's also something that we always help our customers with, making sure you don't pay too much based on Sentinel or SIEM running cost. Giving you maybe as the last point on that specific Sentinel cost, an overview. If we look at our own customer base, people who are now in organizations who are now on our SOC service, often we see a bit a link between the size of the organization based on the amount of users, of course, because that will add complexity into your IT environment. And the average, it's really an average ingestion cost on Sentinel on a monthly basis in this case. But of course, it's really an average because you have some specific outliers depending on the data source or sources in question which are ingested. The amount and typical tier of data, as mentioned, log data. Some customers would really want all data for specific reasons in their environment. Others are more selective. That, of course, can vary the monthly cost of your SIEM. But in general, this is the average for all our customers that we have nowadays. Just to give you an idea, because there are often very specific rumors about SIEM costs and that it will be sky high, but as seen here, it's often not the case. And there are ways to keep that cost between a certain benchmark, let's say. Okay. Of course, if we have detect protect capabilities, we also need to be able to respond if necessary. Response from us as a SOC provider, SOC team. It's on the left-hand side. We specifically use for that the Azure Lighthouse connector, which also gives already a direct link, of course, but especially we use GitHub access, which is the granular delegated admin privilege, which is a security feature from Microsoft, which allows us to have the least privilege access following the zero trust principle. Because you don't want, of course, a SOC partner to have the full privilege access all the time. If we don't need to do any actions, we don't have privilege access needed to your environment. So that's why GitHub is a very interesting, because it's the least privilege and it's also a just-in-time kind of principle for the time needed. You don't have to have a continuous privileged access for a third party on your systems, because that by itself can create a new potential security vector, of course, or attack vector for an attacker, which you don't want, of course. And by that GitHub principle, we can have access to basically all the customer environments, whether it's an Azure cloud environment, your Microsoft 365 environments, even private data centers through the use of Azure Arc components, and the modern workplace if they're managed in a managed context. So really enabling us to respond in case of response actions that have to be taken. For each scenario, each customer in the onboarding phase, we will go through a specific onboarding workshop, by the way, based on which are the response actions that can pop up in security operations. And which of these actions does the customer allows us as a SOC provider to take? That can be for every customer different. We really go through that list. It will always be documented as well. It can also change over time, by the way, based on new insights. As you see here, it's a small example of some actions which will be covered during those workshops. So on the left-hand side, is it pre-approved by the customer? That means if this kind of response action has to be taken based on the incident analysis, we are allowed to take that without prior approval of the customer. The approval is already given by the customer. In that case, of course, we also make sure that we have the necessary access to make sure that we can take those actions. On the right-hand column, those are the actions where the customer in this case said no. If this would pop up as a potential response action to be taken, a manual response action, because automation is already a potential response action which can kick in, of course, we need to give prior approval. In that case, if this would be on the right-hand side, let's say you have an incident, we after analysis say, okay, we have action A and B which has to be taken. We will loop back that feedback to the customer and say, okay, action A and B have to be taken. That's the decision point of the customer at that time to say, okay, thank you, dear SecWise. We will execute those actions, for example, ourselves. Our own IT team will take care of that. Or no, we will make sure that we will tackle action A and do you tackle action B, for example. That can also be a combined option. That's the right-hand column, always the approval of the customer, which has to be taken and give to us to make sure that we can execute that specific response action. That also, if the customer has to take the action or will take the action by itself, that he has to loop back, of course, once the action is executed so that we can close the security incident afterwards, as mentioned, making sure there are no open actions anymore to solve the specific or contain the specific incident. So this is can be a very long list, which we will go through for each specific scenario and each specific customer environment. And it can change over time if you have new insights, of course, but it will always be documented to make sure that the responsibilities are clear for all parties, let's say. Of course, you will also get in every SOC, modern SOC, you will get an SLA based on, okay, what's the response time once an alert or an incident is being generated. We have 4 levels in our SOC operations, which we link basically to the severity level that Sentinel and the SIEM solution will give to every alert. So the Sentinel solution will link a severity level to every alert. It will go from high P1 to the P4 informational, which is very transparent because it's also visible for the customer, since you have access to your own SIEM Sentinel environment as well. For the P1 alerts, for example, our max response time is 1 hour. That's max, and that means the time needed between the alert is being generated, and we are working on the specific alert. In real time for a P1, it will be closer to 10 minutes, but we have to put somewhere an SLA, so that's why we have chosen for 1 hour. The way to the right, so once you lower, or you have lower priorities, of course, that max response time will increase. But as mentioned, and which is also indicated here, it's important that every alert will be handled. So even the informational category, which is basically, as the word says itself, it's more for informational reasons, even those will be answered and handled by our SOC analysts, because they might contain very interesting information. Maybe not really for response actions or immediate response actions, of course, because they're from informational nature, but which might provide handy insights for more the prevent or the proactive actions which can be taken. So that's why also the informational category will be handled and responded to by our SOC analysts. All those details, as mentioned, will become available in a specific customer environment. You will get real-time dashboards, by the way, on which are the type of alerts, which were the tools which were generating those alerts, what were the actions taken, the SLA time needed, etc., etc. All those insights are in real time available in our customer portal. Also, from a response point of view, an interesting point. Let's say you have an incident where you had a compromise, so a compromise in confidentiality, integrity, or the availability of an asset, or even a data breach or data loss in some way or the other. We will always draft up a security incident report with all the topics mentioned there on the slide. I won't go into them too much in detail. But this is also an obligation. Let's say you have NIS2 compliance to follow. You will have to inform CCB within 24 hours of a compromise of your first status report, and even in 72 hours a detailed status report. That's something your SOC provider, so us in this case, will handle for you. Because rest assured, if you have a real cyber incident, the last thing you would like to do is draft up a report towards CCB to inform CCB what's going on, what might be potential damage, etc. That will be handled for you by us. We will also even, by the way, are able, if we have the approval of the customer, to send the report to CCB in name of the customer, with the customer in CC then. But that will be taken care of as the response actions by the SOC provider, and you don't have to worry about those specific reporting obligations. But it also is potentially interesting for internal use, of course. So that's standard in our SOC operations that we will deliver those type of reports when they are needed. Okay, that brings us to also a very important part of SecOps, which is often a little bit maybe neglected in some specific other SOC providers. That's the preventive part. As mentioned, SecOps in our mindset is not just there for detecting and response capabilities, but for the full scope from prevent to recovery. And why is prevention very important? Well, if we fail, combined then customer versus partner, if we fail in optimizing and evolving in security setup and security operations, we will fail in defense in cybersecurity. Because your SecOps insights, that's basically based on your own environment, they are a gold mine for interesting insights in which are quick wins we can take, which might be proactive improvements we have or we can make in the setup of security itself, in the underlying security configurations of those specific tools that might evolve the setup itself in general. We rather stop potential threats at the front door than having to go into a detective / response capability, of course. And that will pop up also out of your SecOps data. It also gives you insight, for example, in user activity, which are the users which are always clicking on every link or opening every attachment they get. Maybe you can drive a specific awareness campaign to those specific users. All those kind of insights will come out of your SecOps data. And that will be fed by us in specific meetings that we will go through those recommendations and insights to really drive those potential quick wins and proactive improvements. Secondly, the defense tooling itself is continuously evolving, of course. Even now, every defense tool is becoming more and more cloud-enabled. That means you're not relying anymore on version XYZ, but it's continuously shifting. For example, if we look at Microsoft security defense tools, I think every month there are multiple changes. It's important that your configuration, so that's really the foundation on which your SecOps is built, not just the scene, but really the components underneath, your firewall technology, your EDR solution, your identity solutions, etc. They change. You need to make sure that your configuration evolves with those changes as well. We can't afford anymore to have a setup and then leave it be, let's say, for X, Y, Z number of years, because you will fall behind in detection, in protection capabilities, because those tools have changed over time. They have added new features, but that doesn't mean if the feature becomes available, although it's cloud-enabled security tooling, that it will become automatically available in your configuration. Often it will take some steps, some configuration steps. If you don't execute those steps, you will still be on the situation as of the initial setup, let's say. And that's something that needs to be avoided, of course, because you need to evolve and your configuration needs to evolve as well. That's also an insight we can provide from a SecOps service, of course. Why? Because third one, also the attacker tactics, they are continuously evolving. That's why also threat intel is crucial. We see already have something, let's say a new tactic pops up in Asia, for example. You can be really sure that next week those specific tactics will also be in Europe, will be in the United States, will be in Northern Latin America. It's a global scale we see, especially for specific or campaigns who are successful. They are often sold on the dark web to other attackers during the Attacker Inc. model, as mentioned before. So threat intel and following threat intel and those tactics of attackers is also crucial in your SecOps operations. That's also covered, of course, by your SecOps and your SOC team. And last but not least, as mentioned, vulnerability and exposure management insights are also crucial elements. You can't have successful SecOps and rely on detect and respond capabilities if on the other side you keep all your doors and windows open through vulnerability and exposures. Because those are the first things a hacker, once he has a potential foot between the door, will look for. What are potential vulnerabilities or exposures that I can exploit as a hacker to get a deeper control and command scenario for those environments. That's why in our standard SOC operations, we will give you an oversight over an insight in all those vulnerabilities which can be detected. Often you have, out of your custom security tooling today, you will have those insights already. For example, Defender tooling of Microsoft gives you vulnerability insights. You might have specific tooling for that, Qualys, Nessus, you name it, tenable kind of scenarios. We are able to also use that data in our SecOps and to give you an overview of all those different vulnerabilities to really drive also insights and recommendations based on those of that data that's becoming available, which is also crucial in the overall preventive measures, of course. Also there's by the way, something new. If you have an E5 from Microsoft, there's also exposure management now, which is a new feature, which gives you also a lot of insights and is really worthwhile to explore. Or we were more than happy to explain that to you, but it's not the topic of this session, but make sure that you're aware that it's available if you have E5 features, that exposure management is there, a very new, interesting insight for really your exposure insights on your environment. That will lead to, these are some examples, by the way, to really have recommendations based on that security posture. So what are vulnerabilities? Not only the vulnerability itself, every vulnerability will have potential risk scenario also based on what's the system which is behind, what's the vulnerability exploit, easiness itself, etc. You want to tackle first the high risk, of course, and then lower down in the list of low risk impact. But that's also info that will be provided if the data sources, of course, and the reporting capabilities are present in your setup. But as mentioned, often customers are not aware of specific recommendations or reporting capabilities of their defense tooling, which might already contain those vulnerability insights. So that's why it's crucial that we, if you have them, take them more up in our security and SecOps reporting and overviews. Here another example of the risk-based vulnerability management. And we really have also actions linked to those specific vulnerabilities, of course. Okay, that brings us to a last part. We can't skip AI, of course, anymore in the age of AI. AI is everywhere. It's also in your defense tooling already. It's in Sentinel, it's in SIEM, it's in all the security components. On the one hand, we need AI to defend, so helping us as defenders from a technology point of view using AI. But we also need to defend against AI, because obviously also hackers are using AI today to drive new tactics, to get new insights, to even enhance their social engineering, for example, using AI as a mechanism. So it's on both sides. That's why AI will become the next years and months. It will become crucial in your defense as well. We are now exploring with AI agents for defense. So in our Microsoft SIEM context, Microsoft has something it's called Security Copilot, and it's releasing multiple specific security agents, as they call them, to the market. This is an example of a specific agent for phishing. Agent or Security Copilot agents is, in this case, you need to look at it as an assistant for a SOC analyst. It will, on the right-hand side here, you see that little Copilot stuff. That is basically the agent which kicks in if you have the Security Copilot, which will draw up a lot of insights already by default based on alerting. In this case, it's specific for phishing. So the phishing email is already in the inbox, in this case, of the recipient, but there are no actions already, or there is no, let's say, incident already reported, but the phishing email is already received. So here, in this case, the Security Copilot will help driving those insights. It will also do recommendations in next steps to be taken. That doesn't mean that it will replace a SOC analyst. It's more an assistant to the SOC analysis and to the SOC analyst to say, okay, these are things that I would recommend, maybe look into them, or maybe already a few steps further down the analysis, that those insights are already gathered by those specific AI agents. That doesn't mean that we can automate everything with agents, at least not for the moment. That maybe not be anywhere in the future, but it's definitely a help and an evolution that we will also follow and invest upon to have those kind of AI capabilities on top of all the AI capabilities which already exist in your defense tooling itself. Making sure that we keep one step ahead of the attacker landscape, let's say. Okay, now next question would be, of course, how can I get hooked into a SOC as a service like our watched service? Well, basically, you will go through a few steps. Every environment is different, of course. To start off, we will often do a small intake assessment to make sure what is the current situation, which are the different security sources you have and security tooling. Do you have full detection capability, or are there potential some areas where you have nothing for the moment and which might be interesting to add something in your security configuration, because that is crucial or could be crucial. Once that is done, of course, we can really collaborate on, okay, what's the journey to getting you into that SOC service? Do we need to take some specific configurations? For example, we will always need a Microsoft Sentinel SIEM solution in your environment. If that is not the case yet, then we still need to install and configure that Sentinel solution, which is a small step, but it has to be done. Then you will go to all those different onboarding workshops that is more based on, okay, which are the responsibilities? What about retention periods for specific log data, etc.? How much time do we have to keep that data available? That can vary also from organization to organization. So those are all different workshops which we'll run through. We will link all the specific sources into the Sentinel SIEM situation, of course, and making sure that the data is available. And then Often at the beginning of a new month, we will make sure the SOC service become active, and we will follow up all those different alerts and incidents for you. Why at the beginning of the month? We have a contract formula where we have basically a fixed price per month for the customer. And that's for invoicing purposes. It's easier, of course, to have also the starting point always at the beginning of a new calendar month, so it can follow the calendar months for invoicing as well, making sure that it's also from an administrative point of view very easy for the customer to follow the specific service and the linked invoicing attached. General in lead time, we talk about if there are no major changes to be done in a underlying configuration of security sources, etc. We have a 2 to 3, maybe max 4 weeks lead time in getting you onto our SOC service. You have some options, of course. You don't have to take the full scope, which is even an option is a 24/7 coverage, so really 24/7 SOC service. Automation will always run 24/7, but it's the manual response capabilities and the manual analysis capabilities, which can be optional 24/7. We will always advise to take 24/7, although your activities might not be 24/7, of course. That doesn't mean the hacker is not active 24/7, but it also comes with an operational attention point for your own organization, because if you have 24/7 coverage, we might also be able to reach somebody on customer side 24/7, because if we don't have access or we are not allowed to do manual response for certain actions, we need someone else from a customer side to be able to do those actions. And if it is in a 24/7 window, of course, that means also from customer side, we need to be able to reach people in a 24/7 coverage. So that's often the operational side at the customer, which has to be taken into account. We can really go further in that vulnerability and posture management. We can even manage it as a service for the customer, but that's an option. Then we really do or pull more the really management and follow-up of all those vulnerabilities and actions to be taken on our side, instead of that the customer has to make sure that they will be orchestrated and executed. We have some additionals of options regarding external attack surface management and specific a monthly cyber advice, really deep dive in your configurations to really drive not only a recommendation, but also the evolution of your security defense tooling. But those are options which can be made available if a customer is interested. Okay, that brings us nearly to the end. Maybe last but not least, an example of, as mentioned, a hack attempt we saw recently on our SOC service. It was that fake CAPTCHA attack. So it's very ingenious, actually. So, of course, the hacker created a CAPTCHA. User would try to log on into a specific service or URL, or at least he thought it was the valid service. And he got a pop-up for a CAPTCHA to be filled in, making sure it's a human, as always. They even mimicked, in this case, Cloudflare, which is, by the way, a security tool. So if you would be an IT kind of person, you would say, oh, okay, Cloudflare, great. They use Cloudflare for this, which is not the case, of course. And it was very ingenious. And they even have, as you see here on the left-hand side, is the real screenshot of the pop-up of the CAPTCHA that the user got. They even have, as you see here, the confidentiality and terms and conditions. It even gives you some terms and conditions if you click on that. But in this specific case, they ask not just to click on all the traffic light kind of scenarios, but no, dear user, can you please press and hold the Windows key R? Then in the verification window, just click Ctrl+V and then enter. Simple, because then we can verify that you are a human. Of course, that's what a normal user would think. Okay, that seems obvious. What happens in the back, of course, is on the right-hand side. Basically, you open the Windows run with that Windows +R combination. They insert malicious code during the copy-paste kind of action. And by pressing enter, the malicious code will run in the window, giving them command and control on the user's device, basically. Why is this ingenious? Because this is again an example of where you use kind of a scenario where you lure the user to do an action and not just deliver a payload or an executable based on whatever URL you might be visiting or opening a document. No, it's the user really himself or herself who is doing the action. Those are typical scenarios which can evade the classical antivirus detection capability because it's a user just doing an action. And there's no file downloads, there's nothing else. It's just something a user does. Of course, in this case, it was detected by the Microsoft Defender, so the EDR component of Microsoft in this case, which said, although it's an action taken by a user, a PowerShell command, it is suspicious because the nature of the PowerShell command, in this case, by the way, also Defender EDR, it has behavioral analytic capability, so it can even distinct between is this kind of an IT user or is it more an office user who is not common in doing IT kind of commands, especially not PowerShell commands. So even that can be taken into account, but it will always generate this specific detection, by the way. But it's just an alert, detective alert. The tooling, Microsoft Defender in this case, or the Defender EDR component, it doesn't kick in automated response. It doesn't say, oh, no, we're going to block this action. It just reports from, hey, it's an action taken by a user. It's suspicious. It's even a combination of medium and high, because there were two alerts coming in, medium one, high one. But if nobody follows up, it just pops up in your list of alerts and high incidents or incidents in general. But nobody looks into these specific scenarios, doesn't see the analysis, doesn't make the analysis, or make specific action. In the end, nothing happens. It's detected. That's like in my previous slides, in the first few slides. An action or an alert is reported, but it's what happens with that. It's basically the follow-up, making sure that it's analyzed and making sure you can take responsive actions. In this case, a very specific responsive actions, which make it crucial that you have SecOps capability, whether in-house, whether it's as a service with us, as a third party, for these type of more stealthy attacks, let's say, to make sure that you can really stop them in the early stage, avoiding to have, in the end, a scenario where they have full control and command based on this initial attempt of attack that they successfully were completing, basically, in this case. And we saw this scenario, by the way, already popping up with multiple customers. So just to make sure, maybe check internally if you have your IT team to look for CAPTCHA attempts, and especially if you have Defender for Endpoint, it reports the alerts as a medium and a high. If this would pop up, making sure you capture those alerts already and make sure you can take responsive actions if you see those things already popping up in your specific alerting today. Voila, this was an insight in our SecOps and how SecOps can help. Maybe now we will look into the Q&A. Dear Michel and Helen, are there any questions asked in the Q&A?
So far, no questions.
Are there any questions? You can still type them in if you want in the Q&A, then we can tackle them immediately. Nobody? If not, then we will close this webinar. I will thank you for your attention. As mentioned, the recording will become available within a couple of days. You will get notified of that by email, and you can download it again to re-watch this webinar. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, don't hesitate, of course, to contact us directly. If you want to have very specific questions, we can always help out and are more than happy to help out with those questions. Thank you very much, and see you next time.
See you, everyone. Bye.